But remember last time I talked about Le Corbusier, and it's really with him, it's really the passing of the hero architect. You know, these great hero architects of the early 20th century, they really change everything. Almost irrationally, unbelievably, somehow kind of aesthetic fury takes up all of Western civilization. It's a very curious thing, probably a reaction to World War I when you come right down to it in the end. But of all those, Corbusier was the most earth-shaking. He changed the world the most, largely for the worse, I think, especially in urbanism. But his buildings, of course, have still that wonderful challenging quality that, in a way, nobody has sustained since that time. And a good example of that is Chandigarh itself, where the early photograph on the left shows this heroic, empathetic relation to mankind, to this great challenge of the building, which challenges the vast landscape, stands out against the mountains. And then the Indians don't like that, and there's no more sentry, and they have just potted plants up against it here. It really, as I said, a student said to me once, it really is like Venturi's mother's geraniums. It's the jettisoning of this heroic vision of the architect, which in a way had done a lot of harm, and in favor of a more anti-heroic vision, a gentler one. The architect more like a physician than like the great creative maker and smasher which Corbusier was. Now, however, in the 50s when that was happening, there was still another of the great hero architects alive, and that's the first one, really. He's really the first. In terms of modern mythology, Frank Lloyd Wright is the first one who sees himself as the real shaper of the world in a new way. And of course, remember, his life seemed to end in 1914 with that terrible tragedy at Taliesin, where Mrs. Cheney and her 2 children by a previous marriage, and the gardener's son and other people were killed by a maniac, and Taliesin burned, and he was left alone. And then his wife, who'd refused to give him a divorce all this time, gave him a divorce after Mrs. Cheney was safely dead. And the parsons in the region gave sermons to the effect that this was the natural result of sin because he and Mrs. Cheney weren't married. And so he really was broken. He was a broken man and alone, really. And that's why he so much, for that time onwards, loved the Japanese and so much hated the fact that we were fighting the Japanese in World War II. Matter of fact, the FBI was investigating him for a while because he said if, in fact, we were to defeat the Japanese, it would be another of history's lamentable examples of the victory of quantity over quality. And that didn't sit very well with J. Edgar Hoover or anybody else. But nevertheless, that's what he said, because the Japanese came to him when he was really down, and they offered him this greatest program that Tokyo had to offer, which was a big VIP hotel, a hotel for foreign diplomats primarily, and important foreign guests. It was called the Imperial Hotel. And if you see it on the right, the way Frank Lloyd Wright designed it, and of which you can still see a few pieces around because it was torn down later, unfortunately, you'll see that it's not at all like that samurai tradition of the little wooden houses we talked about before. This is another Japanese tradition of big, massive, cut volcanic stone architecture, which also is part of the Nikko tradition in Japan, which Wright hadn't dealt with before, but here where he picks it up. And he mixes it also, as we'll see, with Maya elements as well, because the scale of both is the same. They're both masonry, and there's both majestic scale. If you look at the plan, you're reminded of the fact that Wright never had anything that's big to build before. So here he falls back on a basically Beaux-Arts plan. It's really almost a French plan. You almost wouldn't be described if Tony Garnier or somebody had done it. Where you have a central axis, cross axes going out to the rooms over here, big central room here. What there was, of course, to it was this structure, which Wright was so proud of because it enabled the building to ride out the earthquake of 1922. And that was a structure, I'll show you this, a section in the middle where you had a bearing wall up through the center from which shells of concrete slabs went out to exterior bearing walls, and all of it was on a foundation like those of Chicago, which did not go down to the bedrock, which shook. in the earthquake, but was floated really in the deep mud of Tokyo above the bare rock. So even there are people who visited and so on during the war, or after World War II, you could see where the earthquake wave had gone right through it. There was a wave that went right through this building from that central space, with those slabs intersecting out in space, to these spaces going out to the edges of the building. Very low scale, tiny scale for the Japanese, with great big details, however, so you get this very monumental, overwhelming feeling of majesty in these very tiny squashed spaces, especially in height. And in section, I referred to before, Wright called it like a tray in the fingers of a waiter. You see, it's going down in these caissons, really, and it doesn't go into the bedrock. And the central bearing walls are here. These walls, of course, are also bearing. The slabs go through it. The whole thing is elastic, and right, you get out to this point out here, and that's where you can get the Japanese carver to work with that lava stone that he likes so well and works so well, which is very easy to work. And it gives you that strong expression of the horizontals and the compression of that heavy weight. Look at the scale of this. This is really just barely head height right here. Enormous scale of these great big details like this. Now that scale, when you look at it in one of the porte cocheres like this or something, you really feel that it's as much Maya scale as Japanese. Very big, very heavy. It looks like glyph blocks. Looks like a Maya stela, as we talked about before. Now, we remember that he'd had very definite Maya influences in his early work. We saw him exploiting the Maya serpent doorway and so on. But then he'd stopped it. That had disappeared. But in the Midway Gardens, which remembers the last work he did before the events of 1914, he had this quality where you had a lower area of wall which is plain, then you had a strong string course, and then heavily marked block right here, like a stone mosaic. Now that's very Maya. For example, this is the Temple of the Three Lintels, so-called, at Chichen Itza. You see, you have that quality. You have that lower floor is bare, and up above it you have a cut stone mosaic which is set in concrete, very rich and very solid. And this is a kind of approximation of that in industrial materials. Well, then, in 1915, the very year he gets the commission for the Imperial Palace, he gets, out of all the work that he used to have, he was getting no commissions to speak of, he got this cold storage warehouse in Richland Center, Wisconsin. And there it could be Maya because it could be all solid, because it's all a cold storage warehouse. And he has three lintels, really, like that one. And then up above, he has he's got what looks like a cut stone mosaic with the noses of Chak, the rain god, coming out at the corners, holding up the flags. But they're really, of course, concrete, precast concrete blocks. But it's very close, closer than really he'd ever come before. It's as if now, you see, he's lost his suburb. He really can only take on the whole continent. He's lost that lot that he used to work on. He could work so well. All that's gone. And now he's in a different world. And that world leads him to Japan. And it's almost like what used to be called the manifest destiny of the United States. It leads him westward. And in the course of his trips back and forth to Japan between 1920 and 1922, he spends a lot of time in California. And he builds his next important building, really his next house in California. It's for a woman named Aline Barnsdall. And it's on a very special site near Hollywood, where you get a bare hill, rises out of the fairly congested urbanism down below, with garages and all kinds of things around the base. And from that hill, you see the mountains beyond. And it's a site from which you feel the shape of that whole big area, a lot of Los Angeles and of its mountains. So he puts a mountainous form there, and it's very much a straight Maya form. And it's like, say, Temple 33 at Yasjilan, which we looked at before, actually. Here you see it in a typical Beaux-Arts rendering after restoration, so it all looks like plaster, you see. It doesn't really look very Maya at all in its textures, but that's the kind of thing he does there, and it is all plaster. It's not concrete, solid concrete and masonry like this one. It's wood frame, very light construction. And it's something he's never done before, and what he always covered with ridicule. He's really just making a shape and constructing it any way he can, and it doesn't all grow out of the nature of the material, which he talked about all the time. But he has the typical Maya mansard roof, which makes it look so massive, so heavy, and it seems to weigh down on the black voids of the doors below. And then he's got hollyhocks around, like an image of that rich mosaic that goes around on the mansard there. The whole house, we know from letters that he wrote and the client wrote, the whole house is intended to be very symbolic. Mrs. Barnstable wanted it to express the Pacific Rim. That is to say, she wanted to have the Pacific, which is water and fire. Water and volcanoes make the Pacific. And the whole house is intended to express that. For example, here's the fireplace, right? You see to the right of that thing over there. And it opens onto water. There's water here. And that water flows through, this is the upper level, flows through a little stream that goes right down through here and goes down into a pool, across which you've got a great big another mansard roof is projected. So it's like these massive things spouting fire with the water sliding down underneath. And you look at that fireplace, and it's got another one of his wonderful proto, here's already 1920. It's still early for Art Deco, but he's got one of his typical Art Deco reliefs. Down below it is the water. There's the fire burning in the water and reflected in the water. And then the stream is irregular and asymmetrical there, flows down, finally to this very decisive hemicycle of pool down there at the end. And then across that goes this bridge, which should be enormously heavy. You wonder how it could possibly span unless it's all solid concrete, but it's just the opposite. It's an illusion. It's very light. It's like World's Fair architecture, made to look very monumental, but it's picking up, and he's very consciously intending to pick up the shapes of the mountains. Now, this is the first of his Maya-type buildings in Los Angeles, and he builds four, only four. And he builds them in a way that he feels is more integral to the shape he wants. And he builds them in masonry, or rather in concrete block. And he builds just four. And they really are some of the most, I think some of the most beautiful houses, I've seen them all, some of the most beautiful houses he's ever built. The first one is for another woman named Millard, who sold antiques and loved the Maya as well. And it's in Pasadena, so it's up in the foothills. This is not far from that Green and Green house, the Dodge house that we talked about before. It's up above the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl is behind us, way down below. This is up high with the hill rising behind it and a stream, a stream coming right down the middle, which I suppose is why she was able to afford the land. Nobody would build there. It was really a bog, but he uses that. He puts it right above the stream. He lets the stream go 100 right here. Then he has this concrete block, which is hollow, and some of it and richly patterned, naturally repetitive, but nevertheless patterned, and it can be threaded through with steel rebars, really, like this. Then it can be poured with concrete because it's hollow. So in the end, you get a solid concrete wall or beam. Some of them are perforated, so light can go through them. You get this very rich texture. But at the same time, if you look at it, you see it's not only Maya, but the basic shape with the lower floor, the balcony, two-story living room, and a roof garden, that's Corbusier. And this is built in 1923. And Corbusier publishes that second of his Citroën projects in 1922. And you see it's the same. You've got the first story lifted up, then you have the balcony, then you have the two-story living room, then you have the roof garden. It's exactly the same, but he throws out Corbusier's desire to make this a Neoplatonic wall with no mass, and he makes it rich in mass, rich in texture. And more than that, where the Corbusier, as we've seen, cannot sustain itself unless it's constantly kept up. It's very fragile. This doesn't matter what happens to this. The more it weathers, the better. The more it chips, the more it darkens, the more it stains, the more everything is better, because that's the way it's supposed to be in the rainforest. And you think of these two, not only as the Maya temples are, but as they were seen. by the first explorers, like Stevens and Catherwood, for example, in the 19th century, who drew them among the foliage in the rainforest. And when it rains in Pasadena in the winter, heavy rain, and the water comes through and it leaks, of course. It leaks like mad, the house. They all do, fundamentally. You really feel that he is building an experience, no matter what, which is of the discovery, not only the character of those temples, but of their discovery by Europeans. And you go for that house, inside you see, it's like Corbusier too, it's 2 stories high. The bedroom area is back there. There's a fireplace underneath, which Corbusier wouldn't have, a big fireplace. But you see how he uses the block. Because he's got the reinforcing in it, he can have these blocks which look as if they'd simply fall out. They're really part of a beam. So he can make them float. And he can make them do things you wouldn't think they'd be able to do. It's really part of a kind of magic. And when you enter the house, this is the view you always get of it. And it's through a fence, a metal fence where you just get room for the camera. You can't enter this way, though. You enter from the other side, which is up the hill, and you enter half level up. And this is what it looks like on the other side, like this. There are the 2 garages, and the entry is right in here. And the second floor is going above you, right through there. And you see all the block and the foliage growing on it. And then you see how the block is magical. Because how can this possibly sustain itself as it goes across? The rebars are hidden inside. It's a solid concrete beam, actually. You're in this strange world which is rising above you, like a ruin emerging from the forest. And indeed, it's very Maya. This is a place called Caba in the Puc, where you have a cut stone mosaic set in concrete, which is of the rain god, Chak. And you see what it looks like. It looks like a cumulus cloud. And indeed, if you look at the detail, you see there's the mask of the rain god, and there's his great nose. Comes out every once in a while. But you see, it is like a cloud. And it's wonderful. It's almost as if you're flying a light plane. Cumulus cloud is rising. You're trying to get over it. You're afraid you're going to stall. It's filling the horizon. That's what it's like if flying in cloud like that. And look at it rise like that. And he manages to get that without being able to have all that wonderful carving. So on. He manages to get that quality. And also the quality of its emerging from the jungle. And indeed, the winter I was there in 95, it rained in Pasadena. My God, there was a blue tarpaulin over the house most of the winter as the rain came through and it came. But you really felt you were in the rainforest. And it made me think, it's strange for me, having been brought up in mannerism, that it was really better that it evoked something else as well. The Dodge House by Green and Green down the street was nice, but it never had that dimension of being something else as well, recalling something else, being something else, giving us a sense of an experience of this continent which wasn't quite that of Los Angeles, but which in fact you could evoke when it rained especially. It's really amazing. Now he just built 3 others of these, and they're all wonderful. This one is called the Storer House, and it's in a typical site. It's way back up in the hills. Later, when Bannon wrote his book about the 4 ecologies of Los Angeles, he gave a lot of importance to these Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, but it's not true. They don't shape Los Angeles. It's really the Spanish type, the courthouse type, that shapes Los Angeles down below. These are hidden away. You can hardly get a modern car up the road in front of this. It's so narrow and tight. And it's just a pavilion looking across the view, because it's quite high here, with just a tiny little space behind it in the top of the hill. Wonderful pavilion, though. Look at that, in the rainforest. It's amazing. Also, technically, he must have really hated doing the Barnsdall house with that wood and plaster, because now he shows you what block can do. And you see what it can do. It can make walls, and he shapes those bedroom areas with the walls. And it can make piers, and he shapes the great high living room area with the piers. And the walls enclose the piers and make up all the space. He's got 4 bedrooms, 2 levels over here. Great big living room. You see it there with a fireplace, and stair coming up through it, just behind it, and very close to the street down here, just a tiny little bit of space behind. And in plan, you can see it there, and that fireplace, where that fireplace is, you can see how he's really thinking of these like temples. I mean, the scale is so enormous. It's only a little living room, really, but the big scale of this. And the staircase is behind, going down there. Then this crude, sort of strange fireplace, like this. He really is making a temple. There isn't any question of, as much as Corbusier is playing, Wright is really not exactly playing, but he's making what he used to call in his lamentable vocabulary, he used to call a romance. He's making a romance. He's making something special from that point of view. The Freeman House is almost the most stirring. It's backed up on a low hill, which comes down above Hollywood, just above the level of the street. And on the side away from the street, with the hill behind you rising, looking down toward the city this way, so you've got the solid wall, and then miraculously, those blocks are becoming beams and going way out there across your head. And they aim directly at the city. You're in a pavilion, and he exposes all the heating and air conditioning and so on through there. And then out there you see the city just below you, so you're just above it, like this. And you see through the perforated blocks like this. And you see where he gets a window detail. He just brings it, it's like Gropius, only he takes off even the metal at the corner, just the glass comes together. Like that. And that is so much in contrast, an intense, passionate contrast with the heavy block, which he shows you at one of those corners, which seems to be falling down through the glass, which is so crystalline and fragile, and the block is so heavy and barbaric. And I show you another slightly different to make you feel how you're just above the city. And while he only builds a few of these, when you go around in a day and look at all these, it's as if they shape the city. It makes you see the city in a different way, especially the last one of all, the Ennis House, which is like the ultimate temple above the city, floating above the smog. Look at it, floating above it. Really amazing. Down there, the smog, there's Los Angeles down there. It's rising up. And look at this massive thing. This building is in terrible condition today. It may all collapse. Part of this wall has fallen. A lot of it's fallen. It's not his fault. It's the rain. I told you before what the soil of Los Angeles is friable. You really feel it's like a Minoan soil that's going to give way to earthquake any moment, and it may do so. This whole house is like a great movie set. And of course, a lot of the movies of the 20s and so on had sets that were a little bit like this. They were rather Mayoid in quality. This rich, exotic, strange. And most of all, you see, it's wonderful. The way you see it from below, it's as if you're seeing one of the great Maya temples before it was, the brush was cut off it, before it was excavated. Because that's what temple number one at Tikal was. It was all covered with jungle, and it was like that. And he lets the whole hill be the base, which he isn't able to build. Now he also, at this time, he has no work. It's really no work. He's having all kinds of marital troubles. After his wife gave him a divorce, and on one of his trips to Japan, very lonely, he got tangled up with a woman who turned out to be very unstable. They were going to get a divorce in the 20s, but then she decided not to, and she raised holy hell. And he got involved with his last wife, Ochilvana, who was much younger than he was. That's when he had those pictures taken to make himself look younger in 1924. The first wife accused him of crossing a state line for immoral purposes. The Mann Act got 20 years for that. He was arrested. He was thrown into jail for it. He struck the deputy. He was always feisty. He wasn't very big, but he was tough. He struck him, and so on and so on. So it's a nightmare. And he didn't have any work at all. And so he had to, but then in 1928 he got this great commission, which was for a skyscraper in New York, in the Bowery, way downtown. They called it St. Mark's on the Bowery. And you can see what it was. It really is very Maya in the sense you have these planes going back up. These are each 2 floor levels of glass with copper here. So remember, that's all the copper and glass all the way up like this. Then he has he calls it it's like a tree. He says like a tree in nature, but a child of the spirit of man. There's a central spine that goes up and cantilevered floor levels that come out. So there's no structure on the outside, it's all glass. And it's like the Maya roof dome. He expresses all that. There's the structure. coming out there at the top. Now you can see where that comes from. I mean, that really is straight Mies. That's that great Mies project of 1921, where you have the cantilevered roof slabs and all the glass cut back like a diamond. But two things, Wright's surface is much richer. It's also, you see, it's got the copper, it's got the glass. It's really a rich little tree growing like this. And secondarily, it was perfectly buildable and wonderfully planned. I tell you, intricately planned. That center core had all the heating and circulation and everything in it. And you see, you get the cantilevered beam coming out, and each apartment was 2 stories. Where's the living room? Anyway, one of these is living room level, and then up above is the bedroom level with 2 bedrooms in it, like this. And they look over like this, and the whole thing is as intricate as a watch, but it all works. He can really plan. You know, when you see him planning, the European architects look like amateurs. They really do. They don't have that same, maybe it's that American obsession with integration, making it all work that I talked about before. But he does, it really works with Wright, which it really, you know, the others, well, it's fun, but it doesn't work this way. And of course, he finally wasn't able to build it. The Depression came along in '29. It was finally built after the war in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And I don't like it as well. Here he's got offices on one side and homes on the other. I guess it's vice versa like that. And brise soleil, so it's not as elegant. So, well, that one is so beautiful, that glass and copper. This is okay. And it's funny, you know, he used to say, I build out in the prairie where it's all flat, so I have a horizontal building. When he built this, he said, I build out in the prairie where it's very flat, so I have a vertical building standing up against it. So it's whatever he wants. That's why long ago I gave up on architect's theory of architecture. Architect's theory of architecture is only what will serve what they want to do, really. That's fundamental. It's something very important to believe, and because it is a fact, and it's especially so with him. Now, on the other hand, here's this poor man. Remember these sad pictures he had taken? This is a little earlier, it's 1924. No work. What's he going to do? And it's very difficult. Now, what he does do, he gets a house, and it really is a block house. It's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's for his cousin, Richard Lloyd Jones, and his wife, Mrs. Lloyd Jones. And you see it here, as he built it in 1929, and it's very strange in scale. It looks like a penitentiary. You'd think that was Leavenworth. You'd think that was enormous in scale, at the edge of a great field, but it's really quite small. Human being is about like this. It's a block, which goes up in these, so you don't have any walls. There's no scale. There's no way to read scale on it. And he has flat roofs, and he has a system of paving slabs in tar for the roof, and it leaks like mad. And there are famous stories where his cousin calls him up and says, Wright, it's leaking on my desk. And Wright says, move your desk. And then there's another one where the real climax was when Mrs. Lloyd Jones, remember this because you'll hear it again, came into the middle of the room with the rain coming down around her and said, that's what comes of building a work of art and leaving it out in the rain. Wright will remember that, and he'll use it later, as you'll see. Now, why is it so strange? I think it's because he's imitating Mies. He doesn't want to get caught. I mean, if you take Mies's Wolf House, I talked to you about before, see how these blocks, then the slabs coming out, and then the chimney slabs standing period. It's really Mies. It's Mies. But he doesn't want it to look like Mies. He wants to conceal that. But it is Mies. And you see it here, how much it's like this. And you see the scale, how strange the scale is. The Mies scale is wonderful because he accepts the basic blockiness, but Wright doesn't want to look too much like that. Now, there's another thing, too. It's not only Mies. There's a Viennese architect named Rudolf Schindler, one of the most likable characters in Los Angeles architectural history. He comes over and he works with Wright all through the blockhouses. He works with Wright from about 1920 on for a long time. And then in 1927, he's on his own. Naturally, he and Wright fight like mad toward the end. And he builds a house in Newport Beach for a man who was a health fanatic. where he wanted to have a house which was right on the beach, and he had a lot of money, and Schindler built this wonderful house which is concrete, which has those concrete sort of bents like that, supporting the bedroom floor, which is up above the living floor. We'll look at it from the other side of the angle. The living floor is here. There's a balcony below it. The bedroom floor is here. And you get these concrete slabs, which do this, you see, at the end of the beach. Then Schindler made the great mistake of bringing over his colleague from Vienna named Richard Neutra. And Neutra was a much smoother character than Schindler, and he got all his clients away from him, or a lot of them. And he got this client away from him, too. And he built him a house in 1929, which is back in the hills, behind the Ennis house by Wright, you saw before. And you see it does the same thing. It cantilevers out across the declivity, but now it's a very light steel construction, like this, and it has these light slabs, which slide one like the other, but it's basically doing the same thing. Now I show these two because then when Wright got the chance, the first chance he'd gotten to build a big house in 16 or years or more, when he got the chance to do the Kaufman House in a place called Ohio Pile, Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania over a little stream called Bear Run, he got a chance to do that. It's as if he said, I'm going to show these people how to do it. This is the way we're going to do it. And you see what he does. He really outdoes them both. He does it in concrete, like Schindler, and he has it across the slope here, like Neutra, but he has the, like fingers of a waiter holding a tray. He's holding up here a fantastically cantilevered and corbelled slab, which is cantilevering all this way out here, and which goes back and sits down in the bedrock behind it. Above it, there's another one coming out across it. And the supporting rock is in a cross thing, so you've got this thing far above this waterfall, which flows under the house, and where you are elevated just above it with these are, I don't know how he got away with them. They're not high enough. You have a sense of real danger up there. You feel if you step back, it hits you just in the wrong place and you go down below. It's all full of daring. Now, of course, people have said Wright had done this before. Like if you take a typical prairie house like the Gale House here in Chicago in 1928, you get the slabs coming out, but it isn't the same. See, this is symmetrical and quite careful, quite cautious. This is really, if we ever have one that really is based on it, it's Malevich. Look at this, the plane in flight, look at it. All of it. He's really outdoing the Europeans at their own game. That's exactly what he wants to do. He's showing them how to do it, showing you what you can do. And here's Malevich. Look at the little red line up there and the slabs at the top. You can take that right into every detail. The red painting of the muggins, the windows, the slabs like this. See, but everything that goes up must come down. And the whole structure was stressed far beyond the way he detailed it. Now, whether it could have been detailed, it's being rebuilt now. It's been rebuilt 4 or 5 times. This is the deep rebuilding, though. Whether this will prove any better than the others, we don't know. But you see, right from the beginning, it began to reflect. This shows it under construction, but it's been like that on and off over the years, several times. And there are all kinds of stories about that. You know, Kaufman's engineers, the client's engineers, who had done a lot of work for him, sent him and analyzed this house and showed them that it wouldn't stand up. And Wright said, well, you can keep it in your safe as a curiosity. But it was really true, it didn't. And then another time when Wright tells the happy story that they said he had to build a wall under one of these. And Kaufman made him do it, and he built the wall. And Kaufman said, see, it's holding up beautifully. And Wright said, look, and he'd left a couple of inches between the wall and the slab. And it hadn't deflected even that much. All that's eyewash, though, because it really was far beyond, and the whole thing cracked, kept moving all the time. It always has. Fascinating, really. Now, there's another thing, though, too. If you look at it like this, the way you come upon it, and that's the other side. That's the end of the experience, the other side below the waterfall. It really looks very compact. And it has a pyramidal organization going up to a roof cone, like that. And in there, in that second growth forest, look at that, eastern woodlands, typical second growth. It really does look like those old Charnay etchings of prints of Les Anciennes Villes du Nouveau Monde of 1885 that was so important for Bruce Price and Frank Lloyd Wright himself. It looks like one of those temples, except now it's not mass, but it's all space. But Wright really thought of it as a temple because he didn't want it to look like that. That's not white. That's whiter than it really is. It's really a tawny, tan stucco. But Wright wanted gold leaf. He wanted it all covered with gold. So it had a really Maya richness. And very much in the jungle, in a magical place. Another strange place. The other thing is, of course, the basic way you approach it is the typical sacred movement. You have to pass water. You go across, you have to go across water like that. And that's the way you approach the house. When you look at it, you see the housing for the stair behind that balcony, and that circular form in relation to the rectangular slab makes you think of Corbusier. And Corbusier is the only one of these architects. Well, he respected Mies, but he's a little afraid of Corbusier. Corbusier is a really tough guy. And he constantly referred to Corbusier. He's obsessed with Corbusier. He's got to outdo him. There's Corbusier. He's up above the ground, too, but it's on pilotis. It's, in that sense, a very static relationship. This is growing out of the earth. And you have to approach it like this. And as you approach it like that, you see just these wonderful, these Europeans look like amateurs when you see them intersecting. Those slabs come in and the rock sits on them, but it looks as if they intersect like that. They go back into the earth. You go across that bridge, you go behind where the entrance is. The slabs are going in and they're going into the rock down there. And then the building itself is like solid rock opening here. And when you go into it, under there, you notice that the rock is exposed. That's the rock, the living rock of the hill slope is below it. The fireplace is enormous. Then he sends out those curving planes up above, which Gideon said was bad taste. The international style said you couldn't do that. Wright doesn't give a damn. And when you come out from that, it really is a Miesian plan. It looks like one of Mies's details for one of the edges of one of his courthouses. See the way? But Wright makes it all work. This is the intricate closed part. And then it comes out to the cantilevered part, which is going over the water. The water's going right under it there. You're headed out to the water, like that. You're suspended above the water. The sense is of absolute uncertainty. It's frightening, really. It's wonderful. It's part of it. You really feel that the whole landscape is alive. You might fall into it. It might collapse into it. You know the thing is going to collapse someday anyway. All the time could it probably be when you're there. It's really wonderful. Now what it is, it's really like a temple, obviously, to the eastern woodlands, to the old eastern woodlands. And it's so much like the first adoration those woodlands got in the Hudson River School of Painters in 1840s. Up the Hudson, that's a painting of 1849 by a painter named Asher B. Durand called Kindred Spirits. He has a poet and a painter, Cook, and what's his name, looking at a landscape which is built out. You see, the rock is built out the way Taliesin, the way Fallingwater is built out. Cantilevered out. Cross space, please close the door. And it's almost as if he's building that. It's building that. There's the same landscape, a little trickle down below it, the dangerous rock, all the second growth timber, all of that around it. Now, as I say, all this time, he really has no work. And it's in this period where he has no work and where he feels the pressure of the European architects, he does his first general plans. And his famous so-called Broadacre City is of this period. And it's shown at the Museum of Modern Art in 1932. Now, I think it derives directly from Corbusier's four routes that we talked about before, of 1929 to 32, we talked about before, where you have the routes off which you get a linear city developing. See, that's what you have here. You have, here now he doesn't care about railroads or canals. It's only the highway. He's got the highway. He's got garden and industry. Then each of these is an individual house. Imagine that landscape. So it's really, the town is spread out, without any center anymore. Spread out, I always feel like the contents of a wastebasket along the highway. Now that's, of course, the way America was going to develop. Wright's not responsible for it, but he's very attuned. He loved automobiles. He had these crazy cars that he reconstructed. He used to take these Lincoln Continentals and close up the back window because he said he never looked behind. And he'd have these great cords, great shape like that, Cherokee red. He'd load all the apprentices in and travel from Taliesin North to Taliesin West and so on. And he didn't mind it, and he said that's fine. He hated the city. This is the real contempt for the city. It's not a suburb. It's a linear city along a highway. And Corbusier, remember, would have these great big grids, and these are each big apartment houses. Each same grid, Wright's got there, but each one of those is a little tiny house. Look at the way that space is being used there. Enormous. Talk about sprawl. It's the ultimate of sprawl. And the apprentices had nothing to do, and they worked on it. They put his tower here, which never got built, and so on. And there's a big model. And he would overlook it like Corbusier, imitating Corbusier, really, over the whole thing. Now, as I say, in that period, he didn't get any work. And his apprentices were really all starving. So in 1934, they got a letter from a dean, the college there, Dean Willey, Malcolm Willey, in Minneapolis. Sent him a letter that he'd been inspired by his friends. He'd want to build a house. He only had $10,000. He wanted to have Frank Lloyd Wright, but would Frank Lloyd Wright pay any attention to him, such a little appointment? So finally they said, try it and see. All you can do is see what he does. So they wrote, and finally he got an answer back saying, yes, come and confer with us. We'll see what we can do for you. He came into this place, and there were all the apprentices there like starving wolves with shadows under their eyes. And there, right in the board, was his letter was tacked up saying, Hosanna, a client. So Wright did the best he could for him. So all the work he had was this little $10,000 house. What he said he should have was this, a plan where he had, you see, he had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom down below. He had a study, which Wright calls a sanctum, down below. He had a maid's room. Up above, he had a separate kitchen, a big living room going off into a dining area toward the kitchen, an upper-level terrace, a use of the Maya roof comb, really, and Maya detailing in wood, like this, and it came in at $16,000. This is the mythology. I don't know how true it is. It's probably not a word, but this is the... And it came in at $16,000, and Willie could either go to a contractor who'd give him all the space he wanted for $10,000, or stick with Wright, see what Wright could get for him. He decided heroically to stick with Wright, and what he got in plan was this. It's really very interesting. He got the first... he got the first house of the modern period, you might say. First of all comes down to 1 floor. Secondly, there's no more maid. She's gone. There's no more maid's room. That's gone. The kitchen is open to the living room, so Mrs. Willie can participate in what happens here. There are still 2 bedrooms and a little study, and he just, by making that 2 feet wider here, he turns a corridor into a library, which really kind of wonderful. 1 bathroom. Wonderful about this. These people were willing, just 1 bathroom. Imagine, they go crazy today. People go mad. 1 bathroom, they go mad. They keep killing each other for the bathroom. It's really, really wonderful. And then the great big fireplace right there. Big thing, which came up there in the middle of the house. And it was richly detailed, richly designed with that brick. A great big fire in it. And up above, you see, it comes up like a teepee. And you know, in a teepee, a Plains Indian teepee, you have wind flaps up above. It's one of the great things about it. And they can be opened, they can be turned to catch the wind, or they can be closed. And here they go up, and that's exactly what you have here. He did, in 1922, when he was doing the Pueblo stuff, he did a teepee type, also a little bit like the trees around it for Lake Tahoe. It was never built. Now, though, he gets that. And we're looking off Mrs. Willie in the kitchen. There, it runs over, and so it's living. It's just a pavilion, brick, solid, strong, fire, basic. It's really wonderful. And it's a really very kind of conservative exterior. It goes out toward a railway cut, which is actually over here. And you've got a hipped roof and shingles and so on. Wright decided that that was too conventional. So as things began to pick up and he could build it a little bit, in 1937, he designs what he calls the first Usonian house. Now, Usonian comes from a novel called Erewhon by an English writer named Samuel Butler. Erewhon is the United States, and he calls it, Erewhon is the name of the novel. He calls the United States Usonia in it. So Wright calls them Usonian houses after that. This is the first one. It's the Herbert Jacobs house in Madison, Wisconsin in 1937. Jacobs was a newspaper man just starting out with very little money. Wright claims to have built this for about $5,500. I don't believe it, but nevertheless, it was very, very cheap. Here he's got later then they begin to call all his houses Usonian, so it gets confusing. But this is the first Usonian. What he does is really very, very bad. He says he uses the American lumber yard as really a pre-cut system. And he takes slabs of plywood. What he does, he gets rid of the studs. There's no studs in the house, no vertical columns. He has basically stressed skins, which are made of plywood and wood on the outside, and they're all screwed together. And that's terrible because the water gets in there. You've got to have space in the wall, as you know. And nevertheless, and then they support a roof, which is supposed to be made of 2x4s, which cantilever out like this. Whatever the case, some they build that way, some they don't. But nevertheless, that's his view. But it's got also a sociological cast. Every one of these is supposed to be on an acre. You will not build on less than an acre. Everyone must have a vegetable plot. So it's kind of an agrarian dream in the modern world. This is the view of it here, opening to its vegetable plot. As it does that on its 1 acre, it completely turns its back on the city. This is the street. No longer do you have any responsibility to the street. No longer do you look at the street. This is the climax of all that stuff he was doing in the early 20s. You just have, it's a shack on the street side. All responsibility for shaping a place is gone. This is the ultimate sprawl. Again, the plan is like that too. It's a Messian plan. Come through under that carport, turn to the right, go around the fireplace. It opens out to the view. Comes back here. The kitchen is in the middle, lighted from above. You dine outside it, and you've got a tail of bedrooms. And that's basically the Usonian plan. He uses it one way or another over and over again. But it's really like a camp. You still feel the Indian. You still feel it's kind of a Boy Scout. I went to see one of these in Massachusetts once. It was the nearest one to me. And it was a professor who'd built it. And I asked him why he built the house. And typical young, silly academic, I said, I suppose you want to express our time or really live in relation to the modern age. He said, no, I want to live outside. And that's really what it's like. It's like a camp. Wait a minute. You see it opens through the doors like that, and that's the only place you have any verticals, right there. But you see it is in the fireplace. It's like a camp fireplace. So on. It's very small, but it's really beautiful. I mean, that warm wood and all that. It's very comforting. Then, building these, he used everything he knew. For example, here's one for 2 school teachers. Getch-Winkler House in Okemos, Michigan. And you see its model is very clear. It's the Barcelona Pavilion, which he owed so much to Wright. There, though, where the wall goes right up to the roof, he's got a window, but that's because they demanded the window to light the kitchen, which is behind it. And you have the long slab, and you have the glass, you see. And way down here, you have the wall, and you have the wall there. But the plan is totally different. He uses that long wall of glass to mask the fact it's a very awkward intersection between a pavilion and a tail of bedrooms. But it does work like this. And this is the heart of it, right in there with the fireplace, and the dining, right part of the fireplace, like that. He doesn't put the fireplace, and then you have a fireplace group. He grabs it with the dining table here, and you're on top of it. But it's a cavern, you see. Really, the light is coming in from above. It feels primitive. It feels like a camp. And remember, Corbusier is doing much the same thing at exactly the same time. Remember this, the maison, the light coming down from above, the Khmer statues, as it were. But with Corbusier, there's always kind of an irony. You feel this is a French sophisticate. This is Malraux, who knows there are many points of view. With Wright, it's real down-home American imagery of the fire. Abe Lincoln by the fire, heavy, not far in the past. It's really right there. It's not like that German writer Mai writing about cowboys and Indians. This is it, right there. He really gets it. Really makes you feel it. On the other hand, you know, it's wonderful. He does this house for a writer, a biographer, Lloyd Lewis, the biographer of Sherman, and it's by a river in Illinois, and it's lifted a little above the ground because it floods. And right almost later, of course, but conceived at almost the same time is the Farnsworth House. And they look at first so different. I mean, how could they be more different than they are? And yet when you look at them, you really feel there's a master doing both. And they're similar. They're both small, for one thing. Really wonderful, these people. He was a very successful author. He had a lot of money. Not a big house. Right? And they're both lifted. They're both decisive. They both know what they're doing. You really feel the kinship between the two. The other thing is where Wright is always talking about the relation to the landscape. And it's there all right. He doesn't really change the house type much. Here's the Pawson House in Arizona, looking toward the Superstition Mountains. Soon he's going to build his Taliesin West out there. And it's really the same as that, except a little slightly different color here. Takes the rocks here and makes it more primitive. So he inflects it toward the place, but it's the same type. And he also says, as you see, this house burned. He also says it's important to have beautiful ruins. It is, there it is. There where the Mexican bones, as it were, come out in it. Now, what he wanted to do at this time, though, was explore the whole geometric realm. He had those rectangles that you've seen. Then in Palo Alto, the Hanna House of 1938-40, he goes to the hexagon, six-sided. And he likes that because it does two things. You can see it if you look here. The flow is more than you get in a rectangular relationship. You can see that. It counts off, the space flows. Secondly, as it comes like this, out into space, it also encloses you more. Feel the building, like that. Now, of course, that leads you to the circle. We already saw his Martin Spence project from 1940, where he has the big piers in the middle, the water coming underneath, the whole thing contained. And this time he's talking about Lao Tzu and what's the reality of the water glass, the space within, space of great peace, the space of the goddess. And of course they do remind one of those goddess temples. Interior, a pier in the head, here in the center. But you get, and how much he knows about this one doesn't know, but that's what he's after, the earth. And he builds one, at least he builds a number like this, but he builds one that's really wonderful. And this is at Middletown near Madison, Wisconsin, and it's by Herbert Jacobs, by his first Usonian client. Herbert Jacobs now has risen in the world, and here in 1947, 10 years later, he has a bigger house. And he goes out to the prairie, and Wright goes underground with him, berms the house up on the north side with just a thin band of windows on the north, so it's right against the wind. But of course it also is calling that the business of the early Scandinavian settlers who built those sod houses. And there was that book by Roldad called Giants in the Earth, about those settlers out there digging in the prairie. And that's what you do. You go in, you go underground, it opens on the other side. It's got a depression, a circular depression in front of it. The window is continuous back there. The whole thing is open inside. So in the heat, and it's hot there in the summer, the air comes from the north. It's pulled down by the depression, and it cools the house. It really does. You feel it move. This air is alive. Talk about an ecological connection with the landscape. It's really there. And it also takes the whole horizon. Look at that. It takes you the whole horizon. It's really, really marvelous from that point of view. Now, on the other hand, the greatest building he did in this circular way, he does very early in this system, 1936-39. And this is the Johnson Wax Company in Racine, Wisconsin. And it's an office building like his Larkin building, the early period. And you see what it is. He wants a structure which has no cornice. There's no connection between the walls and the roof. He wants the roof held up by columns here, with light coming down from above and light coming in from the sides, and the walls just to contain it. And he wants these columns to look as if they're too slender to hold up anything, because he wants it to look like a pool. He wants them to look like water lilies, which is what he calls them, with the blossom up on the water, and then the stem just reaching down to the bottom. He wants to overturn your empathy. So he does this column, And he's so successful at it that the inspection people say it won't hold up the weight. And that's a very proud story he tells, where they load it, and they load it, and they load it, and the inspector slinks away, disheartened because the building is so strong, and finally they break it. But he wants it to look that way. I mean, the guy was doing him a favor. I mean, he's up and see, he's holding it down. And it's also wonderful if you compare it with the Larkin building. So you're supposed to enter, up there you saw it there, the entrance there is to the left, that's to the right. The columns are down there to the right. So it's all rounded, it's pulling you into it. Now, it's exactly the opposite of the Larkin building, where it's this big thing you have to challenge you. You have to go in. Now, psychiatrists have said often that in 1900, everybody's big problem was a dominant father. In the 1930s, everybody's big problem was the fact that they were afraid that their mother was going to swallow them all up. It's all going to be mummy, like this. So there you are, that one in 1904, and you challenge it, and you go upstairs, you bang on the door, child, roll into the dark. This one you say, no, no, mummy, don't, no, and you pull in, and then you're drowned. Drowned, right? Then resurrection. Boom. You're alive, but you're better than alive. You've never been born. You just float into that wonderful pool. You're underwater. You're in the amniotic fluid. You're in a pool of water underneath. You're floating in it. You really feel that. And it's amazing, a most wonderful experience. And if you like that sort of thing, and I do very much. The two stupidest remarks I ever heard about architecture were made about this building. One was by a Bauhaus guy who said, he could have spanned it with one beam. Well, he could have, and then what? And another was by a philosopher who said, isn't it excessive for typists? Well, good for him if you can ration out where you're going to get your religious experiences. Most of us get us at work, actually. And how wonderful that is. And of course, to be in the pool, it often leaked. Leaked like a clear. Anyway, marvelous. And they all loved it. And it's magnificent. And look how different it is from the Larkin. There's all victory, hard edge, Papa's in charge, holds you there, mummy. It's really marvelous. Fantastic. Now, of course, it's easy to compare them with Minoan columns, bigger at the top, smaller at the bottom. I don't think he really was thinking water lilies, I think. On the other hand, it has very Neolithic, very Bronze Age connections. The other quality, for example, with the circle, and the underwater quality of the Bronze Age is the spiral, which you also get in those temples in Malta. The spiral, which is also the labyrinth, like that. And he puts it all together at the Guggenheim Museum. There's the spiral. Now notice when he first built it, it looks like Corbusier. It's rough concrete. Corbusier would have left it that way to feel the plastic solidity. Wright doesn't want that. He wants the space inside, so he paints it. And all of a sudden the weight goes off it. Look, it gets thin. It's a distended surface, as if it had no thickness. It's all that great spiral. Indeed, it's a spiral which is supposed to have no pain for you. You're not supposed to walk up it. You're supposed to take the elevator up and come down, flow down. Very few people do that, but that's what it's all about. You come up and then you come down, like this. Now, it can be compared, it has been compared by me and by others, to the spiral in the Vatican staircase, which is earlier. But the difference is that this is very broad. It's not a tight stair like that. It's a long way across. It's a big volume. You really feel it wonderful. Spread like this. This goes down. And the things are slightly off, and the light is back there. And it really is like the painting that was going on by that time by Jackson Pollock, where you get the shape of the arm, the space beyond, and all of it in the curve. It's also like the literature of the time, like Jack Kerouac, On the Road. And it really is the road introduced into the heart of Manhattan. We've talked about that before. It looks fine so long as it's got these solid, cubical, law-abiding buildings framing it. If they were gone and you had all those, you'd have the strip. You have the road, but you do feel the road. It brings it in. He says, think of it as being in the park. Think of it as a pavilion in the park. Don't think of it as a street. But it really is all dependent on those buildings that frame it. That frame it so well there. And it looks marvelous, but 2 or 3 of those, you wouldn't have a city anymore. So one does think always, as one does with Jefferson and with Wright already, you think of moving west, moving that road, Kerouac, on the road. And of course he takes that spiral, and he takes the dome, and the road, and he builds it way, way out on the west coast in the Marin County Civic Center near San Francisco. There you are, and there's the dome, the low Roman dome that picks up the shapes of the hills. And there's the road, which is the Roman aqueduct, which goes to it. But he stops halfway, way back in the 30s, where he builds Taliesin West, which I've already talked to you about some. Where now he really can do what he said when he built it. He said even the Mayans, which is the word he used for the Maya, even the Mayans couldn't have done any better. And of course he really maybe should have said the Mexicans, as at Teotihuacan, where the temple of the moon echoes the shape of Tanan, the sacred mountain, and compacts it, and condenses it, and brings its power down. There, it's more primitive. It's like the wickiups of the White Mountain Apache, which are back in those mountains, so-called behind. And where you have the erosion in the mountains, then you have that picked up with those redwood bents, the thing. And it really is it's more primitive than the great sites of Mesoamerica, but it's more like America. It's more like the Apaches there, where you have a tent over here, or a Bedouin chief who seizes the water here. Then he puts his rocks. This is a rock with petroglyphs from the old folks on it. And the stones come out of the ground where he is, like this. And he gestures to the mountains behind it, like this. And it really is, this whole plan of this is based on that whole plantation community that it creates. That is, it's a primitive thing. Here's the chief, and he has a Usonian house right here with a wonderful hearth back in it. And then he has all his apprentices, and they live out here banging on tom-toms and stuff in this sort of compound here. And then they have to get together in the workroom here, great big workroom. And then you have to come in this way though, and you come this way beyond the workroom, and between that and the thing, you get places to eat and dine, and a loggia that cuts right through and gives you a view of the desert, coming all the way out like that, with this garden room here alongside it, like this. And then so you have this beautiful workroom, those wonderful redwood bents there, those great structures, and canvas, all open. Snakes used to crawl in. I mean, the first camp they built, I'll show you the plan in another lecture, they built it in the winter. And it was a temporary enclosure with a wall with these tents inside it. They could only live in it until about this time of the year, because all of a sudden the rattlesnakes all came up from underground. When it got hot, they had to get out fast. But so it's open, and actually I saw a Navajo once beat a white man almost to death for killing a rattlesnake for no reason. For no reason. It's really very moving, and so it's part you're open to the desert, like this. And then you had his room, and you get the precious things that are brought from the East Coast in the Conestoga wagons. You get the piano, and he's a great pianist, sitting there playing with his mane of white hair, like this. But most of all, the thing that Philip Johnson said I wept when he went through it was the hearth. You see the little hearth burning in the middle of the desert, the little Usonian house, the little green garden, and the hearth. Now approaching it too, you start at the beginning of the property, which is not that large, really, and it's just out of sight of Phoenix. And at the entrance, as a kind of image, here's where the chief lives, like this. Then you're forced, I'm sorry you don't have a site plan, to go all the way around it. So you see it in relation to the mesas and the colors around it. You go around it until you come to here. You park here. You come to this point. That's critical, and that point is really wonderful. It's like a bastion by Vauban, like this. And it's got cactus to stop you. But you look right through it to a stone that's set like this. And beyond it, there's a conical hill, which I'll show you in a minute, just like that. To the right is everything the chief owns, but you're not supposed to go that way. Later, those dumb apprentices would take you by the arm and lead you around here. No, that's not where you go. That's the water. There's the grass. There are the sacred objects. But you're not supposed to go that way. You're supposed to go toward that. That pulls the eye. So you go around that. And there is what that is looking at. You see it here. It's this dome, which is called the breast out there, right there. That's on this axis, right here. And when you go through, of course, it's like mounting a dance platform at Teotihuacan or someplace. And you really feel the Pueblo dances not so far north, in northern Arizona and New Mexico. You feel the rhythm of buffalo dance like this. The rhythm is picked up in the redwood bents, that drum beat. Then as you get down there toward that, all of a sudden there's that cross axis I point out in the plan, and you get the desert, as you never saw it before. You come across it, especially in those days, in a hot automobile, hot, man, with no air conditioning. And you really hate the desert. And you get here, and all of a sudden, it's like forever. But it's not forever, as Descartes said. It's indefinite because, again, it's like Hadrian's Villa at Tivoli. Just where you stand on tiptoe, you can't quite see Rome. Here you can't quite see Phoenix, but now you see Phoenix. It's grown towards you, and there's a power line that goes across it and so on. But then it was all you were the buffalo ghost, the bronco ghost, with dollar silver in your saddle horn, the cowboys riding in from Painted Post, the Indian arrow and the Indian corn, and the old folks, the Anasazi mosaics, the lances leveled at the horizon. Look at that. It's really beyond belief. Now that little thing out there in the middle is a memorial to one of Wright's granddaughters who was killed in an automobile accident. And it's actually Lutyens, who's he still got him even out there under the bench. Lutyens' wonderful fountains in New Delhi, looking out across the Mughal gardens. This is the same. It's made of harrow blades, like that. So he's calling to it. It's also not only setting the view out to space, but also the axis back to the mountain. Now that axis right there is right to the Sierra Madre. It's right to that mountain you see at the right. You see it? So I don't have a better picture, but there's the angle. There's the axis right there. And at the very end of his life, as he was dying, in fact, Wright built, watch the focus, Dave. Thanks. Wright built what he called a Menhir Avenue, right up that axis, like this, right through that view we saw before. These are the Menhirs. And the apprentice sent me this. He sneaked it out and sent it to me. And then he also wrote me about what happened when they built it. The stone that was going to be the last one in the heart of the mountain, I wish I had a picture of it. Watch the focus thing. Planted in the heart of the mountain was this one that was originally that one on the axis. And he called it the Madonna. And they were setting it up out there, and he was sitting in a chair watching it. It was winter, it was coldish. He had a plaid around his shoulders. And then they said it was as if he all of a sudden went to sleep. And they took him to the hospital, and he died in his sleep in Phoenix. But he died when they were putting that up. So they took him back, as his will requested, and buried him next to Mrs. Cheney in Spring Green, Wisconsin, next to her tomb. When his wife, old Giovanna, died 20 years later, she had worked it out with those idiot apprentices that they would dig him up and burn him and put the ashes in a pot with her in a wall in Taliesin West. And that's where he is today. It's like an Antigone in reverse. Antigone who did everything. She dared death in order to bury her brother. Here, this woman wouldn't let him sleep with Mrs. Cheney through eternity. She dug him up and burned him. And his granddaughter, Ann Baxter, who was a wonderful movie actor, if you don't remember, deep, wonderful voice, said, "It's all right, my grandfather's spirit was stronger than his bones." Thank you.